Buenos días a todos.
Okay, so good morning, a very good morning to you all, and welcome to the EU CELAC Local Governments Forum. As you all know, this forum has been promoted by the Spanish Federation of Municipalities and Provinces and the Provincial Council of Barcelona under the auspices of the Spanish Presidency of the Council of the European Union, with the collaboration of more than 15 institutions and organizations from around Europe and Latin America. Also in collaboration with the European Council of Regions and Municipalities and Mercociudades. So to kick off the institutional opening of this forum, we have with us Ms. Núria Parlon, who is the Deputy Chairwoman and Delegate for International Relations and 2030 Agenda, Urban Agenda and Public Policy Innovation, Mr. Pau Solanilla Franco, Commissioner for International Relations, City Promotion and Cooperation of the Barcelona City Council, Ms. Emilia Saiz, Secretary General of United Cities and Local Governments, Ms. Leire Pajín, President of the EU LAC Foundation, and Ms. María José García Pelayo Jurado, President of the Spanish Federation of Municipalities and Provinces, and also Mayor of Jerez de la Frontera. Welcome to you all, and thank you for being here. I'll now give the floor to Ms. Núria Parlon.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure sharing this institutional opening of the Local Government Forum for EU and Latin America and the Caribbean with my fellow panelists who have been introduced by Milagros Pérez Oliva. I'd like to greet the mayors who are with us today, very specially, to share their vision and to give input to the different sessions in this forum, and welcome also to all of the institutions that represent the principles supporting very important instruments such as the 2030 Agenda and the urban agendas, which are at their initial stage of development in our different countries. From the metropolitan area of Barcelona and the representatives of the Catalan Development Fund and the networks that makes this forum, will make this forum reach important conclusions so that we can scale up along the lines of the instruments that we have to move forward in the exchanges between the European Union and Latin America and the Caribbean. We know that recently the European agenda was adopted, and this European agenda guides us precisely to work in favor of cooperation. And for that, cities must play a very important role. We cannot ignore that most of the population lives in cities, that life happens in cities, and that the big challenges we have in terms of sustainability and reducing inequality and advancing to remove all of those obstacles that hamper the development in terms of mobility, sustainability, and technological advance must bear in mind cities for what they represent, regardless of their size, to generate balance and social cohesion. This is the space where I believe cities must claim our participation within the framework of this new cooperation and collaboration agenda between the European Union and Latin America and the Caribbean when it comes to promoting development policies that have a clear impact to improve the quality of life of citizens in our different countries. And within this space, I think decentralized cooperation plays a fundamental role in advancing along the lines of the Sustainable Development Goals and to strengthen alliances in the field of international development cooperation. There are many networks that are local and municipal that today are strengthening their bonds, and I think today's event is an excellent opportunity, which, as we have said, was organized together with the Provincial Council of Barcelona and the Federation of Municipalities and Provinces. And I'd like to thank her president for being here, because it allows us to reinforce decision-making, to clearly support these ties and to generate tools for innovation in public policies that ultimately should guide us to improve the quality of lives of our neighbors. I hope the forum is fruitful and that the conclusions we reach can then be shared. And we mustn't forget that the Provincial Council of Barcelona is a second-level institution that has a political advocacy office in Brussels, and the conclusions that we'll reach in this forum should be used to scale them up in Brussels so that they're taken into account for two goals, I believe. First, to allow local governments to have a greater advocacy work through their networking, and secondly, the possibility that local governments offer in terms of innovating in public policies and development policies. I think this is the big challenge bringing us together here today, and I hope that together we will be able of reaching some conclusions that will help us from a local level to improve global governance. Thank you very much, and with that, I declare open this forum. Thank you very much, Ms. Parlon. And now I give the floor to Mr. Pau Solanilla. Good morning, everyone. Mayor, President, Deputy Mayor, Ms. Lady, dear friends and colleagues. First, on behalf of the City Council of Barcelona, the host city, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Mayor, Jaume Collboni. I'd like to welcome you to Barcelona, a city where we are the Euro-Latin American capital, as we like to say. Perhaps it's not well known or not sufficiently well known, but Barcelona looks into the world as a triple capital city, an Euro-Mediterranean capital, an Euro-Asian capital. We are a city that is very well connected to Asia, and we are a Euro-Latin American capital. We always have been. The director of Casa América, Marta Nin, was telling me that the first Casa América in Spain was established here in Barcelona in 1911. We all think of the beautiful building of Casa América in Madrid, but the first American society, the first Casa América, was established here in Barcelona in 1911. So Barcelona has had a clear Euro-Latin American vocation, and it continues to have this, and perhaps we should explain this better. Secondly, I believe that when talking of cities, today we can say that we don't measure distance in miles, but in the quality of the relations we establish. And I think that local municipalities and governments in Latin America and in Europe, and more specifically in Barcelona, we feel close to one another. So it's not about the distance, but the relationships we establish, which makes us feel close. Thirdly, I'd like to say and explain very briefly what we consider is the big shared challenge among our cities. In a world that is full of uncertainty, we believe that some of the important answers can be found in cities. And we must do this with a triple vision, if you'll allow me to say so. I think our vision in Barcelona is that of a city of livelihood projects, any cities, and not just for its citizens, workers. Everyone has to find their place in our cities. Cities are the place where we carry out our life projects, and we have to have interconnected cities. Connectivity isn't only about airports, ports, and digital optic fiber. Being connected means that we have to be a part of the global value chains to bring opportunities to our citizens. We need to have a second level of connectivity, which is infrastructure. But I think the most important connectivity is emotional connectivity. And I think that Latin America and Europe, through Spain, we have a clear competitive advantage, and that is that we feel an emotional connection with Latin America. The world today is moved by emotions, and I think we have a great opportunity to leverage all of this to improve collaboration. And lastly, allow me to say that even if we have recurring meetings of networks of cities that may not seem that useful, I was talking about this with the Secretary General of UCLG, we have to acclaim the importance of city diplomacy and cities working in networks. We can't do anything alone in the world. We need to come up with smart networks, and we believe that the networks of cities are a useful instrument, not just in situations of conflict, but also to give us support, solidarity, and learn from one another. So once again, welcome to Barcelona. Barcelona is here to help you in whatever you need, and we are delighted to see the leadership of the Provincial Council taking the lead on this forum, and we are here for whatever you may need. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Mr. Solanilla. Next, I'll give the floor to Ms. Emilia Saiz. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to see so many friendly faces, old friends and new friends that we will make by the end of the day. Thanks for bringing us here, the two presidents. I love this panel. It's not often that you see a panel with mostly women. In most panels, you see many fewer women in them. I also am especially pleased that we are brought here to discuss among representatives from the local and regional level from Latin America and Europe, because we are living a time in history, and it isn't the only moment in history, but we're living a time in history where we have an accumulation of crises, and we're also living a time when diplomatic relations in the city diplomacy that Mr. Solanilla mentioned, and also in diplomacy at large, it seems like the interests are not aligned. And it makes it extremely difficult to reach agreements. I think we need to draw on our visions and our values more than on our interests in establishing these relationships. And if I were to name two continents or two regions where we're good at doing this and where we share many visions and values, those regions are precisely Latin America and Europe. And I say this because we share a vision of the individual agency in terms of freedoms, rights, quality of life, the way in which we manage governance. And all of this has been important until very recently in international relations. I think the big steps that have been taken to consolidate democracy on both continents worth noting. They continue to be an important part of our agenda. Perhaps where things haven't gone so well is in overcoming inequalities, which are striking more in some places than in others. But I'd say that everywhere in the world we are faced with these inequalities. And I believe that as part of the global discussions being held, these values and the ideas we share on the meaning of a welfare society, a fair society, a society where we want the children of our future to live in, must prevail. And in the current context, I think conversations around Latin America and Europe are important. They're important for the world at large, but especially for city diplomacy. It is around these axes where we'll have to build bridges that we will have to move along at times when some conflicts will die down and others will arise. The starting point isn't great, and I say this because, well, at the beginning of the pandemic, we were co-constructing and co-designing a different world with different production and consumption patterns, and I think mayors truly thought this would happen. When it came to share vaccinations, it all collapsed, and it doesn't depend on you. It didn't depend on the local level. The sharing of vaccinations didn't depend on the local level. And then was when all of those shared visions and interests collapsed. So as part of this forum, I think it's important that we distinguish between those interests that generally guide countries' diplomacy, and it's what we are seeing with the conflicts we are faced with, And we have to set this aside, and we need to focus on this emotional connectivity and values that the Commissioner mentioned. And we must focus also on an individual understanding of our capacity to act, our freedoms and rights that we all share. I am here to remind us all that we are part of a global family where we firmly believe that this forum shouldn't only be about creating collaboration but forging alliances. The future of future generations is at risk. And the EU Latin America agenda that has been developed by countries, I mean, it's very well to talk about digital alliances. It's great to consider Latin America as the lungs of this world, but we need true alliances in the models that will prioritize just, inclusive and egalitarian societies. That is what we should strive for. In the family of United Cities and Local Governments, with our Latin American section at the lead, I'd like to salute our Deputy Secretariat from Ciudades Unidas and all of our Latin American friends and all the colleagues from our European section. And I'd like to greet the General Secretary of our European section, Sidi Amar. And we are all here to contribute to this conversation and come up with actions for our people, for our planet, and with our governments for an agreement that will unite us in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Ms. Saith. And now I'll give the floor to Ms. Leire Pajin. Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Provincial Council of Barcelona, Nuria, and all of her team for inviting me to be here and for giving me the honor of being part of this institutional opening with great colleagues. It's always a true luxury. It's not by chance, I think, that we are holding this forum here today in Barcelona, in Spain. Barcelona and Spain has always been one of the EU's countries that has expressed the greatest interest and commitment to continue building and constructing relationships between Latin America, the Caribbean, and Europe. And it's not by chance that this space has been organized by the Provincial Council of Barcelona. Just 1 year ago, we came together to talk of the 2030 agenda and how to strengthen the 2030 agenda network of cities through the Federation of Municipalities and Provinces. Spain has a long tradition supporting global agendas through cities and municipalities. A recent law on international cooperation, which was adopted this year with unanimous consensus in the Spanish Congress, recognizes the important and historical role that local cooperation and regional cooperation have had to respond from the place that is closest to its citizens to the global challenges we are living. So I'd like to acknowledge the role of the Provincial Council and the Spanish Federation of Municipalities and Provinces. Emilia was saying that in this world with multiple layers of crisis, the need to continue building networks and to strengthen relations among regions, it has to be compatible from the point of view of interest, is extremely important. This year has been especially important for the relationships between Latin America, the Caribbean, and Europe. After a lot of effort and after far too many years without having high-level meetings, we held a high-level summit among the heads of state and government of both regions. We always said that this wasn't a point of arrival, but a starting point to relaunch our relations, which have to be rebalanced and which call for clear and concrete objectives. We all know the complex world we are living in, unfortunately, faces too many challenges, some of them which are very painful and they require our close attention. And this means that sometimes the European Union focuses on other regions and forgets about the close relationships that we've had for many years now with Latin America and the Caribbean. And that is why the Summit of Heads of State and Government, this declaration which allowed us to say once again that we want to remain committed in our joint action in these two regions should allow us to come up with joint projects that can allow us to build closer and stronger relationships. These shared challenges mean we need to understand that we cannot overcome the ecological transition or the digital transition unless we are able to set concrete and joint goals that are required by both regions. We have to start off by recognizing the asymmetries in terms of responsibilities for greenhouse gas emissions, responsibilities in terms of the raw materials that are necessary and available for the digital transition. There is also a symmetry in terms of the capacities of public administrations to deal with inequalities. And based on this recognition, we need to come up with shared projects and come up with the necessary tools for this. We just launched new collaboration opportunities such as the Global Gateway, which must be a gateway for cities to come up with cooperation instruments to walk the walk together. Nuria was saying today that 60% of citizens live in cities, and urban environments are the ones having to respond to these challenges, which are global, but which are also have a local impact. And that is why we need cooperation instruments that will help us build alliances and find shared solutions, and most importantly, to exchange experiences that will allow us to move on. I think today we also face an important and difficult challenge, and that is to create spaces for science, the academic world, citizens, local governments, that is, for all stakeholders living in a city to work in a shared way for shared mission. And unless we find innovative ecosystems where we can all work unitedly, it'll be very difficult to face the big challenges we are living in these days. That is why Latin America, the Caribbean, and the EU must reach a common understanding, not just because of the historical ties and emotions we share, but because there is no other way. These two regions are extremely compatible in terms of interests and values, and that is why we must reach an agreement to move ahead to face the challenges. That is why from the EU LAC Foundations we are available to cities from both regions so that we can make the most of these networks we've created and turn them into real, tangible spaces of innovative collaboration. Today we also face the challenge of meeting spaces between summits to implement the agreements that we have made and to continue nurturing our relationships, which are strong and solid, so that they can be sustainable in time and so that we can continue building on shared goals and opportunities. So we're here for you to continue working in a global world, but that must also include the participation at a local level. Thank you very much and good morning once again. Thank you so much, Ms. Pajín. Next, I'll give the floor to Ms. María José García Juárez Pelayo. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank, firstly and foremost, the President of the Provincial, the Vice Chairwoman of the Provincial Council of Barcelona for this forum. And we're grateful that you organized it together with the Spanish Federation of Municipalities and Provinces, and I'd like to thank all of the institutions that have made this forum possible. I'd also like to greet all of the panelists that are sitting with me, and I'd like to welcome the participants in this forum. From the Federation of Municipalities and Provinces, we came up with the idea and put forward the idea of including this event as an activity under the Spanish presidency to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We wanted to take the relay from the forum that was held in 2010. As has been said, we had a summit of heads of state, and as my fellow panelists have already said, the goal behind this forum is basically to make sure that each of the decisions taken by the heads of state and government can then be implemented in each of our cities. That is, to leave nothing behind or no agreements left without implemented. We also thought it was important to call the attention of our heads of states. With all due respect, you cannot take decisions unless cities are included and unless local governments are included. Why? Well, because we are the highest representatives of our citizens and we are closest to our citizens. Local governments are the ones that are closest to our citizens. We are the ones who feel the suffering of our people, and we are also the ones who know most about their projects and illusions. So we can't take decisions in the world or at any level if they seek to improve people's lives, if in this decision making, or more specifically, if when implementing these decisions, city councils are not taken into account. City councils and local governments must take a protagonist role. We have to strengthen ourselves. And the only way of being strong is by building alliances among cities that go beyond our borders. We must realize that there is no room for ideological borders. Citizens couldn't care less about this. Citizens want us to be useful, to serve their purposes, to improve their lives, and they don't ask who the decision was taken by. What they value is whether or not the decision ultimately is useful to improve their lives. Recently, we held a forum in Granada, and I was there with the president of the Provincial Council of Barcelona to discuss the local agenda, the 2030 agenda. And this agenda, I'd say, is vital. It is vital because its goal, I would summarize it, is to make our cities sustainable. Sustainable in all senses. Cities that are sustainable environmentally, of course, but a city cannot grow sustainably if it leaves its citizens behind. Cities must be inclusive. We need to build inclusive and healthy cities from all perspectives, from a social perspective, from an economic perspective. We need healthy cities in terms of education, in terms of culture. A society that doesn't count on culture, education, sustainable development, equality, and its elderly will ultimately be cities that may grow rapidly, but they'll always be ill. And that is why we open an important discussion in this forum in Granada on the local agendas. Local agendas allow us to come up with a space for reflection, to share opinions and contributions among different governments. And I believe today and tomorrow's forum shares the same goal, and that is to share thoughts and ideas, share programs and projects. And I believe this forum shouldn't just stay at an exercise of sharing opinions, but rather it has to serve to build joint projects and alliances that can be implemented, even more so when we are referring to two regions that are closely knit. We are two regions that are close to one another, even if geographically we may be far apart, but we are united by one thing above all other, that is a sense of a shared family. We feel close to one another because we are happy to consider ourselves as brothers and sisters. And I think this precisely can help strengthen our alliances. Nothing will work unless we have, firstly and foremost, a spirit that joins us, that connects us. And I think the European Union and Latin America and Caribbean have a sense of brotherhood, which is the starting point for any alliance that may come from this to be efficient and positive for our citizens in both regions. And I'd like to conclude by thanking you all from the bottom of my heart for being here. I'd like to thank you because I truly believe that if you are here, it is because you believe that things can be done much better than they are being done today. I think you're here because you feel the urge to speak up with a united voice and to remind our decision makers, that is our governments and heads of state, to remind them all that we may be smaller territories in terms of population, but what makes us strong is that we remain close to our citizens. I think this is what makes us the most powerful and strongest organization in the world. And if on top of that we can work through alliances, it makes us local governments unstoppable. So I truly hope that we continue to believe in what we are doing, that we do it with reinstilled energies, and that we do this listening to others, to our neighbors, to our colleagues, because they can always contribute usefully to do things better. This is the raison d'etre of this forum, and I can say it won't be the last. There are many more to come, I'm sure, because Lady has a lot to say about this. We were talking about this before. We need to come up with checks and balances at an intermediate level to allow us to continue working and being convincing, and I'm convinced that there will be many more of us the next time we meet. Thank you very much.
Gracias, señora García.
Thank you so much, Ms. García Pelayo. Thank you so much, everybody, for your first welcoming introductions and contribution that truly reflect the challenges and ambitions of this forum that throughout the 2 following days we'll be debating about very relevant matters. Thank you all, the 5 of you. Let's continue with the agenda and let's get started with the next panel. But before we do that, allow me to share with you some practical housekeeping issues. You have probably seen that this forum will hold 8 dialogue panels made up by a wide geographical representation. And after that, we will have space for debate. So after each panel, we will hear from the different speakers and we will open up some space for debate where you can all participate. We want for these 2 days to be a space for dialogue and discussion. So please feel free and ask for the microphone to participate in this discussion whenever you need and like. The last space on Friday will be a panel of conclusions made up by selected people, and we will close the forum with a reading of a statement collecting the main conclusions of these 2 days that we have ahead of us. In terms of logistics, just some information. We will have a pause at 10:45 for a coffee break, then 2:15 for lunch, and today we will finish at 5 o'clock. After that, you will have your cultural agenda activities. We would like to remind you that there's a label. There's a tag for the forum, so it's Forum Gleufelac, just in case you want to share your debates and reflections and comments with people who are not here with us today. So please do not forget to use it when you're communicating through social media or Twitter. You also have a Wi-Fi network. The Wi-Fi is Paraninf, and the password is Paraninf2020! ! You also have it in your papers. You can also follow the forum agenda through the website or the QR code that you have at the entrance. And now, without further ado, let's move on to the first panel devoted to cross perspectives between Europe and Latin America. I'd like to ask the speakers to come onto the stage. And we will hear from Eugene Zapata, head of Latin America and the Caribbean of Resilient Cities Network. He will be moderating the session. Mr. Pablo Javkin, mayor of Rosario and representative of Mercociudades. Mr. Fabrizio Rossi, Secretary General of the Council of European Municipalities and Regions. Mr. Federico Castillo, Secretary General of the Ibero-American Union of Municipalists, and Mr. Xavier García Albiol, Mayor of Badalona. In this cross-perspective panel between Europe and Latin America, we want to have an exchange of ideas on the present moment for those regions in Europe and Latin America. As you know, we are experiencing very chaotic times. 3 global crises in 15 years are more than what we thought we could withstand. We have withstood them, but that does not mean there's no pain behind or challenges ahead. Both regions are affected by the influence of the perma-crisis or multiple crises that extend the effects because precisely there's synergies between them. This precisely sheds light on the fact that cities hold the greatest challenges of humanity, such as poverty, inequality, rise of urban violence, the phenomenon of migration, the problems generated by climate emergency, the need to adapt to the digital transition, the economy of platforms, or informational control regimes, as well as a democratic crisis which is deep and is oftentimes related to security and corruption. So it is a panel that will frame within this context of crisis or perma-crisis the different challenges cities in Europe and Latin America need to face. So, Eugene Zapata, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It is a great pleasure to welcome you here. Everybody who is present here, but I believe we're also streaming through the channel of the event. So, welcome everybody who is following us from close and afar. I would, of course, like to welcome you to this first panel, this discussion panel on cross perspectives of Latin America, European Union, and local governments. I love this expression of cross-dialogue because sometimes we can just watch in silence, but I believe that Europe and Latin America have observed each other in silence for many years. We heard in the opening session, and I see it's pointed out in the conceptual document for this forum, that for 8 years now, there'd been no summit for heads of governments of these two regions, and this cannot happen. 8 years without coming or sitting to the table to discuss and dialogue and solve matters and issues together, especially in context which is as volatile as the one we're seeing currently now. The pandemic came and went. We have armed conflicts, and it is absolutely undesirable that two partners such as Latin America and the European Union are not discussing and looking at the future together. Many of us here were present in the events around the Summit of Heads of State that took place last summer in Brussels. And the sadness was to see that the local dialogue and that the presence of subnational governments and city councils, provinces, was not too relevant. And not because people did not want to attend, but because the bi-regional agenda, Europe, Latin America, is focusing on other issues. So I would like to celebrate these 2-3 days of work that we had ahead of us, the initiative of the Barcelona Provincial Council and the Spanish presidency of the European Union. Of course, the alliance between the Council of Municipalities and Regions in Europe and Mercosur and the FEMP to once again insist on the fact and bring the attention to these cross perspectives. And I hope they will be no longer done in silence, but with a discussion and in this bi-regional context. So we would like to bring this to the table and open up everybody's appetite to talk about what's local in this Euro-Latin America perspective. I loved the words stating that this is Euro-Latin America capital. This is where the decentralized observatory was born for Europe and Latin America. There's always been this push, and not only a political push, but also technical and financial push on behalf of the stakeholders, but not only in Barcelona, also in Catalonia and Spain, towards European and Latin American dialogue, and we must not forget that. So the panel will be organized as follows. We will go into 3 blocks with our distinguished speakers. In the first block, we are going to ask about the global challenges and the local challenges we are currently facing in the European and Latin American space. In the second block, we will be talking about solutions, actions, and specific things that are being articulated, and we will close up with recommendations for those who are following us, both in Europe, Latin America, or the different stakeholders who will be part of this new stage, I wish, of this European and Latin American relationship at a local level. I will start by introducing you. All have the agendas before you, but I would like to have the words of Pablo Jafkin, Mayor of Rosario, representative of Mercociudades. Welcome, Pablo. We also have Xavier García Albiol. Mr. Xavier García Albiol, welcome from the Mayor of Barcelona. Fabrizio Rossi, Secretary General of the Council of European Municipalities and Regions, and our colleague and friends, Mr. Federico Castilla, Secretary General of the Unión Iberoamericana de Municipalistas. So, challenges, many. I believe the list could be endless. We're not going to have this become a complaint panel, but there's a lot to say. I would like to start with the Mayor of Rosario and representative of Mercociudades. Could you please, Pablo, share with us how is this context seen from your local perspective? How do you analyze and perceive it? What can you share with us? Good morning. Very briefly, I would like to say hello to everybody. I'm here representing my city, Rosario, in Argentina, but also representing the Mercociudades network. I would also like to say hello to the Mayor of Montevideo, presiding our network. I would like to thank the organizers, the Spanish Federation of Municipalities and the Barcelona Provincial Council, the Forum of Local Governments, that we are generating here, and I hope this can be extended further. And congratulations to the Spanish government and the Council of Municipalities and Regions and our hosts in the Spanish Federation of Municipalities. Latin America has, in terms of cities, some challenges that are global and some others that are affecting the different municipalities. So, without a doubt, the great mark of our continent is inequality. We are the most unequal continent, so inequalities that are seen in the differences between the levels of income and the difference translated into the map of our cities, access to housing, to services, the differences between the possibilities of accessing homes and inequalities that are also seen in one of the great problems that we see in our cities, which is urban violence, and has a great impact in the most violent cities in the world. Unfortunately, we hold very high positions in the ranking in Latin America. So, during these times, we are seeing 4 global phenomena, but they are suffered locally. So one is climate change. Obviously, this is also something that has a great impact on us. It changes the entire living conditions of our cities, climate, storms, the capacity of resilience that we have, and you know this very well. Inequality, which is particularly the greatest phenomenon in Latin America, technological disruption. Obviously, we live in a world where technological shifts are making us face challenges. We were in smart cities yesterday, and it is obvious that the solutions are framed within that inequality process. Yesterday, I was looking at the different offers of many of the options, technological options that are out there for our cities. And this is the feeling many of us shared. And finally, and I would like to point this out expressly is, well, demographic differences, because if we're talking about Europe and Latin America, we are the geographical space of democracy, globally speaking, and this democracy crisis that has been stressed after a phenomenon such as a pandemic or war and conflict has a very clear manifestation in our governments and, in my opinion, a very clear solution in the specific field of cities. There's no doubt, in my opinion, that closeness and proximity is the solution. The only possibility of making up this democratic fabric is in closeness and proximity. And this is the best possible way of communicating to our neighbors in a real council or assembly, participative budget process, or a government team in a square to see how we can solve robberies at the entry and exit of a school, or safe occupancy of the square, or lighting for it to be used at night, or improvement of public spaces so that mobility can be improved. We will have a clear democratic response that we don't find at higher levels today. I will focus on this. And I would like to say that the best possible responses of the most practical cooperation between cities takes place in those programs. I'm not talking about gender here or any other issues, but the greatest closeness that allows us to look at the problem with soundness, and this democratic fabric is sometimes very far from the global analysis. And there is where we find the best solutions in the things I was stating in terms of habitat construction, integration of our neighborhoods and districts, the urban fabric of the city, and in terms of the recomposition of social fabric after violence, which is what breaks up our continent the most. Thank you, Mayor. I will hold two key words that take us to the second part of this debate, which is what can be done. This closeness, proximity, and democracy. So, proximity, democracy, there's something to underline there. Okay, let's move on to Europe. Fabrizio. Good morning, everyone. First and foremost, Eugene, thank you so much to the FEM and the Barcelona Provincial Council for the organization of this forum. For me, it is not only a pleasure, but I'm also very moved to be back in Barcelona, in the Barcelona Provincial Council, because as many of you know, it was precisely here 15 years ago when I started my international career at the service of local governments. Indeed, I believe that there's many challenges ahead, and we cannot transform this panel into a round of complaints, as you were saying. Eugene, before I go into this, I would also like to say that it is important for me to thank you personally, the role that you played in July in the forum that we organized in Brussels. Because, as you very well said, in this bi-regional relationship, local authorities, for the time being, are not too relevant, but I believe that we're there. We're fighting, battling, and investing good effort, and I would like to thank you for your contribution. As I was saying, I believe there's many challenges, and I'm going to choose one, the one that I believe summarizes some of the key points that the mayor of Rosario was mentioning, Mr. Havkin. The most relevant challenge that we have ahead, I believe, is uncertainty. No doubt. Uncertainty. Some people define it as the paradox of the uncertainty, because despite the fact that we are in a time in our lives of the human history where we have the most information, data, intelligence, despite all this, we know the least about the future. At present time, at the present day, it is very difficult to understand or try to have a view on the type of societies and territories that we will have in 50 years' time. And this precise uncertainty is generated by the phenomena Mr. Jeffkin was mentioning, migration, climate change, technological disruption with the increase of artificial intelligence, and another important element, which is the polarization that we are experiencing as never before in our societies. Polarization, which is also very specific to our two continents, because precisely given the structure that we have in our democracies, in our institutions, it is precisely there in Europe and Latin America that this polarization is shown in a more severe way. So what uncertainty does at the end of the day is, well, it's the enemy of progress. If we look at the Human Development Indexes since 2019 and the times of the pandemic, for the first time, human development has been going backwards in the world. This is what data say. And never before in the history of humanity there be consecutive years where the Human Development Index had been going backwards. So for me, uncertainty is enemy number one, because it's precisely the enemy of progress. And it is precisely there where we need to place our efforts, because the responses that from local governments and cities we are going to find and we are going to draw up precisely to handle this uncertainty in the coming years, these responses will be defining the type of societies and the type of territories we are going to have in 50 years' time. Thank you so much. Thank you, Fabrizio. Last night, I was arriving in Barcelona. I turned on the TV and I found these protests and demonstrations in Madrid. And it struck me because this TV show, I'd never seen it before, but it's called Todo es mentira, Everything is a Lie. That was the name of the show. And I go back to what you were saying. This is the point we are reaching. Everything is a lie. So this uncertainty, which is related to not knowing what is true and what is not, what is artificial and what is not, the risk of uncertainty becomes the risk of ignorance and people not believing anything, because I don't know whether what I'm being told is true or a lie, so I cannot act. And therefore, I believe it is very important that in this regional discussion, this uncertainty won't take us to not caring about things. So thank you so much. Let's go to the Council of European Municipalities, to Mayor of Badalona. So as Mayor of Badalona, and I would like to say that it is a great pleasure for me as president of this federation to hold this forum in Barcelona. In the presentation of this session, I don't remember who, but somebody said that they liked the panel because most of them were women. So here we're also going to claim our own space, aren't we? And I also like it because we also exist. Here we will see how future sessions come along. So the question that we're being asked and this reflection that is asked from us is very interesting in the framework where we currently are, in the sense that although we're talking about European Union, Latin America, Caribbean, and our realities are certainly different, it is likely very true that our challenges are very similar, despite the geographical distance in kilometers or miles. There is an element that hasn't been put forward so far, but I believe it has an incidence and an effect, which are the social changes when it comes to managing an event, a historical event that is unique, which is the pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic managed to do something that had never before happened, which was to basically and totally stop the entire world. And once this episode was over, it brought along some challenge that in some cases seemed unfathomable so far. Things such as ecologic transition and the evidence of the need for collaboration between city councils and regions in matters that are so important as knowledge in the healthcare sphere or any others. And it is true that in the present day, Europe, Latin America, Caribbean have similar challenges, although solutions may be different. In many cases, we can talk about the realities of migration. In the case of the European Union, we are a region that is hosting migrants coming from some countries in Africa and Latin America as well, some countries in Asia. However, Latin America and the Caribbean, they also have an issue with migration, but in this case, people who are moving out to other territories, to the United States, in some cases, coming to Europe, to Spain. So this is an element that I believe as cities we will have to tackle.
Similar, pero con realidades distintas.
And something else, which is demographics, demographics in the case of Latin America is increasing. The population is increasing in the case of Europe, and particularly in Spain. Demographics, they're basically reducing and dropping, and this is an element that as cities will also have to deal with, and very likely with different solutions. The financial transition related basically to the demand level of our citizens regarding our municipalities and cities. And why is this? It was also pointed out before. The citizen, at the end of the day, wants for their problems and issues to be solved, and the political representatives they have closest is the city council, the minister, the mayor, and there needs to be a process there by administrations and by our governors. And there is an element whose value has also been brought as a reaction of society to the problem of COVID, which is digitization of the public sector. What has happened with COVID is that we learned in the hard way that many of the transactions that we had to do in person or with an appointment, a significant part of the population or the administration didn't really know how to manage this. There are people who are illiterate in the sense of digital processes. The elderly, for instance, don't know how to use new technologies. And also when it comes to administrations being able and capable to do most of the administrative operations in a remote fashion or not in person. So I believe that from the Caribbean and from Latin America, we are going to work hard to have success guarantees, especially in a moment where these elements evolve in a harsh way and not administrations, especially local administrations, not always have the capacity, neither economic capacity, technology capacity, or human capacity to be ready for what is expected in the case of our territories. Thank you, Xavier. No doubt this issue of technological transition is in our list of challenges. And also given the logic of the market, the tech market, and what it costs. So the Ibero-American Union of Municipalists, Federico, I love this name, and we've been working on this municipal nature of things for a long time, and I believe whether there's a union of municipalities between Latin America and Europe, is there a true Ibero-American municipality nature? At the end of this month, we're going to present the first diagnosis of decentralization in Latin America in Brussels at the end of this month, in this last decade. And what we're seeing is not too optimistic or promising. We have seen some step backwards in terms of decentralization in Latin America. What can you share with us?
Well, I must say I disagree with that diagnostic. I think the history of decentralization in Latin America and the European Union is a story of success. If we were to pinpoint the map of Latin America and Europe of the successes of decentralization, I'm convinced we would find no empty spaces to put a pin in. But it is true that the process of decentralization, which generally speaking is a success, a greater fiscal decentralization, devolving competencies and political projection, not all news is good news. I mean, some things have been left behind. Several things. I don't have time now to go through all of them, but I'd like to mention two of them. One very important thing that was left behind is that we haven't, for too long, we haven't moved towards a fiscal or administrative decentralization. For decentralization to give an outcome and an impact on the territories and cities, and I'd like to stress the word territories here, we're not just talking of large cities. The municipal territories are very complex, and I'll refer to this later. What I'm trying to say is that if we want them to be true actors, they have to have political content. It's not about improving the efficiency of programs defined at a national level. It's about turning municipalities into territorial political actors. Things happen at a territorial level. And this means that, A, perhaps we shouldn't come up with new challenges. I think the 2030 agenda is really ambitious as it is. But these challenges are happening in different contexts, and this was mentioned by the Secretary General of the Council of the European Municipalities and Regions, picking up on the UNDP report of 2012. In this report it says that we live uncertain times, unstable lives. We have to shape our future in a world that is undergoing transformation. It's true, this makes it all much more difficult. Why? Because one of the things we are seeing is that our societies are becoming growingly polarized, and we see this especially in Europe and Latin America. We share this polarization, but the level of intensity perhaps isn't shared in terms of territorial and social cohesion. This makes things difficult. Why? Well, because I'd say we live in a times of exclusion. Those who are at the top have their own culture, education, and health, and are totally away from reality. And those at the bottom are excluded from education and healthcare. This makes it difficult to come up with a municipal policy. A municipal policy has to do with governance of our territories. It has to do with participation in politics. It has to do with creating links with stakeholders that can really give a boost to political policies. And polarized societies are very difficult to manage in these terms. They are societies that are less united, where our common bonds collapse at the territorial level. And this makes it very difficult, in my opinion, to stop thinking about municipalities as entities that provide only social services, which they do, but we have to think of municipalities as political actors on the ground. And under the current circumstances in Latin America and Europe, this is clearly visible. I mean, they don't face the same circumstances when overcoming these challenges. And here I'd like to go back to what I said initially. I believe that decentralization in Europe and Latin America is a story of success with some elements that we need to consider. And one important element we need to consider is the difficulty we find in developing policies in territorial units that cannot implement these policies. The 2030 agenda calls us to face up to some challenges that don't match the territorial realities in our municipalities. We have to redefine the notion of a city. What is a city? If we look at Barcelona, I'm sure we can say is the city of Barcelona. The metropolitan area of Barcelona is a different entity. We're talking of many things, functional urban areas, we're talking of meta-cities. I think we have to revisit the way in which we manage our territory, especially in smaller, more rural municipalities. How do we get them to have political agency? I think these are the big questions we'll have to answer in the coming years if we want the municipalist movement to progress. Thank you, Federico. And indeed, the political role of cities beyond providing services, otherwise it would just be down to city management, right, as they say in the US, differently from the mayor, who is a political leader rather than a manager. I think there will be also some time for Q&As from the audience. And before that, I'll give the floor to my panelists. Once again, I'll ask them to be brief. So I'd now give the floor once again to the Mayor of Rosario and the representative of Mercociudades. In light of these challenges, what solutions could we envisage? And perhaps we can link this to a possible bi-regional agenda that we may develop as a possible recommendation. City networks are key here. We firmly believe in collaboration with UN Habitat, with UNDP, with UCLG, C40, the Milan Eurocities, Cireul Metropolis, and Mercociudades, networks of universities such as the Montevideo Group. We have many city networks because we know, as we heard from the other panelists, things that do not happen in cities don't happen anywhere else. It's the time for our cities. We also know there is a fundamental problem, and that is that resources very often lie far from our cities. Cities come up with demands. We are close to our citizens, but very often we do not have the resources to offer direct response. And I think it's true everywhere. None of our institutional systems give us a leading political role when it comes to the distribution of funds. I'm not talking of the collaborative funds that we may gain from networks or organizations. I'm talking about resource distribution. They don't look at the local level, which I believe is the most important when it comes to allocating funds. Responsibilities are handed down to cities, but if they don't come with responsibilities, this crisis will also affect citizens. As a challenge, I'd like to talk about youth. One of the four main problems I mentioned is getting young people into the labor market. And the huge digital gap is something we must focus on. It's where we are trying to put our greatest efforts into in my city. We have an ecosystem, meaning it's the second global fort for cereals. And the focus is on biotechnology, the 3,200 miles, and how we can narrow the digital gap so that people living in the new neighborhoods can access the jobs. The only other option they have is to engage in crime. It pays much better. It shortens their lives, but it pays much better. This is a reality we see. And at the local level, we know with a name and surname, we know who the people are because they participated in our spaces, or they were cared for in our healthcare facilities, or they took part in a sports team, and then we see them killed at the age of 19 by the drug lords. So we have to consider our young people. They are the ones migrating. They are the ones who don't find their place in society. That's the most serious point. And I think we need to unite or join our efforts in this. I'd like to go back to a word of a Spanish philosopher about Argentinians 84 years ago. He said, Argentinians get to work. Cities, I say, need to get to work and make resources available to cities. We talk a lot about rights in the city, but if it's difficult unless we have and discuss the rights of cities, and perhaps this forum can help us work out on this idea. Cities must have the right to gain better resources to give a adequate response, because it's the solution, I think, to some of the four big challenges we face. Thank you very much. The rights of the city. I like this concept. I think they should be included in the minutes of this panel. The rights to a city to gain access to these resources, which are often far from there. Thank you, Fabricio. Next, I'll try follow the dynamic and add on to this reflection with an element which for us now in Europe and thinking about the upcoming European elections next year is very important. It is unquestionable that some of the problems are very specific to our cities. But we can neither forget that when we talk about polarization, one of the most serious forms of polarization we're seeing in Europe is the polarization between urban and rural systems. It's a very important problem, I'd say. And as Maria Jose was saying, we have to stress this and we do, in fact, when we talk to the European Commission. Our impression is that over the past 20 years, a narrative has developed, also thanks to European policies, that have placed these two ecosystems in contradiction. I think part of the polarization we see in our societies today is precisely due to people who live in rural systems and who look at the green transition as a policy that could further increase the differences between these two systems. And as I was saying, I think it's an important thing we should pay attention to. There are two ecosystems which complement each other, of course, and the relationships between the urban and rural environments must be a win-win situation. We can't think of them as antagonist ecosystems. Last year, I was at a cities forum, and I was surprised, I must say, to hear discussions about shortages in food and problems of relating to energy as purely urban problems. They're not urban problems. When we talk of food, the solutions to these problems has to come through ecosystemic approaches that intervene throughout the value chain, from the producer to the consumer. We cannot work in silos and believe that we will find a solution in cities and then independently in rural systems. No, we need to have a more systemic approach to this. And I think we find this difficult. We struggle with this because at the end of the day, everything has to do with the nature of human beings. We are extremely intelligent human beings, but we're also very curious. The most complex thing for me is the problem. The greater the complex we face, the more we work in silos. We create offices, departments, units, and to me, this stops communication. Communication becomes much more complicated. The understanding of the nature of these problems becomes more difficult because communication doesn't flow. And working in silos also puts a stop to creativity. If we work in silos, we have different meetings in different rooms where people don't communicate. This stops the creativity that we need when it comes to drawing and designing the solutions to the problems we face. Thank you so much. I'd like to know that in the network of resilient cities, we use a concept that is the resilience dividend. The resilience dividend means stopping to look at a problem as a sectorial issue, meaning if I want to build a park to solve a social concern, it has to also include the security dimension, the water caption, it has to solve civil protection. So the resilience dividend means that instead of working everything in silos and trying to kill a bird in one shot, and we don't want to kill birds, but when we want to solve more than one problem at the same time, if we look at public policies in a siloed way, it's not the best way of doing it, and we have to work out of the box. Xavier? The element that has been put on the table and finding solutions to these challenges, well, I believe we are all contributing, and I think all of the contributions are extremely enriching. But there is one thing for me that is essential. We know what we need in our cities. We know what our priorities are. And now what we have to reclaim and demand is that agreements taken by heads of states in Brussels in July are implemented, and they have to be implemented hand in hand with municipalities and local authorities as the main actors, or those that better know and face these realities. I want to go back to an element which I think is truly important. We are the closest administration and political authority that citizens go to when they have a problem, when citizens have a need. And if we do not have economic resources, if our national authorities are ignorant of this reality, we won't be able to move forward as we should, I believe. And this is what our citizens are demanding from us. We all have a clear vision as to where we want to go. We do. We know what the priorities are. But we need those who are at the top of our administration at the country level know about this reality and make things easy and bring us the necessary elements to develop these needs and the demands coming from our society. I think we could summarize by saying that national authorities reach agreements, and those agreements have to be developed and implemented, and that they shouldn't do this in a unilateral way. They should do this hand in hand with local authorities, because, as I said, we are the ones that better know the reality. I think we could do much better if we work together. Great, thank you so much. We will now be giving the floor to our audience. So if there are any questions. Well, I think the problem we have is that when trying to find solutions to these challenges, it's difficult doing this with the public institutions we have today. We have institutions and local authorities with a functional structure, with a legal framework, with instruments that were conceived at totally different times. They weren't conceived for these times of uncertainties that we are living today. We need other considerations. The times called for urgent responses. Things change rapidly and uncertainty is great. This is what the OECD says. We have to, it's as if we were being asked to change the tires with the car running. We have to reinvent ourselves. And that is why, in these times, when talking of local authorities, I think there are three big challenges we face. First, we need to boost our capacities in the sense that we need to think clearly of what our priorities should be, what we should do, and how we provide public services. We have to define our governance model. We need to interact with other stakeholders. Secondly, we have to anchor the basic services. We have to redefine with whom we'll be providing these basic services. As I said before, the way territorial units are divided and structured do not respond to global issues. We can't give an environmental response from a municipal level alone. We have to collaborate horizontally and vertically. We have to set up structures that will help us to come up with effective answers in the territories. And we have to modernize our institutions. There are many things we have to do. Accountability, climate, fight against corruption. We have a broad range of challenges that we haven't come up with, for which we haven't come up with true solutions. We have formal solutions, referring to anti-laundering plans for the next generation funds. There are local guidelines for local authorities, but they're formal. I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to look at our success stories. We have many success stories in Latin America. We have Curitiba and Rosario and many other cities. Let me name one city, a much smaller, less global city, Orizaba in Mexico. It's between the cities of Veracruz and Puebla. It was an ugly, horrible city where you wouldn't even stop to fill your petrol tank. And now it's magical. How did this transformation happen? When you ask, the first thing you see is there was a political project. There was a political project that goes far beyond a political mandate, a project that is shared with the citizens, with stakeholders in the city, with the entrepreneurs, with organizations. There is a project. Secondly, they prioritize development. They prioritize development into generating employment and wealth and environmental conditions that can attract new investment and attract digital transformation. And they tested new forms of participation. They forgot about this formal forms of participation that we often use. And they congratulate commitment more than merits. It allowed them to face the challenge in better conditions. I think we need to learn from our failures and learn from best practices. And lastly, we need to think about there is no single measure that fits all municipal units. And this is something that we don't think of, and it's a problem when we are living in these different and difficult times. Thank you. Thank you so much, Federico. We're running slightly late. I'll now give the floor to our coordinator who will help us with the discussion. I know some people have sent me messages saying they want to take the floor. I imagine you have a list. If not, I have 2 requests from the floor. Okay. Indeed, we are running slightly late. It's a shame we don't have more time for Q&As because I'm sure there'll be many interesting contributions. So you may intervene by raising your hand. Please, when you do intervene, please introduce yourselves so that others can know who we are. And I'd like to remind you that for this panel and others, you have simultaneous interpretation if you need. The devices are out in the hall. I see one person asking for the floor there. Please go ahead. Good morning to all. I am Fabiana Boyanecha. I'm the Director for International Relations and Corporations of the City of Montevideo and the Executive Secretary of Mercociudades. First, I'd like to congratulate the panel. I won't name you all, but it was extremely interesting, I thought. Sometimes at this time it's shocking to see a panel made up only by men in the 21st century. I couldn't refrain from saying that. Not sometimes, it's always shocking to me. But it allows us to come up with a case study, and I'll use this opportunity. Pablo gave an excellent presentation on the situation of inequalities in Latin America. He mentioned inequalities more specifically in urban violence. In Latin America, urban violence are profoundly masculine. It's men exercising violence, and it's men, those who are also the greatest victims of violence. They are the killers, and they're most of the victims of murders. They are the ones that are overcrowding our prisons and many other things. In Latin America, which is one of the continents with greatest inequalities in the world, there is a deep levels of child poverty. During the pandemic, women went 20 years back in terms of economic independence. Fabrizio talked about uncertainties, and he related this uncertainty with climate change. Environmental issues are the ones that are blocking the treaty between Mercosur and the European Union. If there's one thing that we are certain about, is that without social justice, there will be no climate justice. And for social justice to exist, we need to combat these inequalities. And to achieve the sustainable development that we talk so much about, is that we need to meet our needs without compromising the needs of our future generations. That is why I refer to child poverty. Xavier mentioned the high natality rates in Latin America. In Latin America, these natality rates bear the face of girls. It's girls who are the poorest in Latin America. Boys and girls, especially girls. You mentioned the low natality rates in Europe, which is directly related to the burden of care carried by women. And if they don't work in 2 or 3 jobs at the same time, they have to choose between working, taking care of their children, the elderly people, or people living with disabilities. Federico mentioned the importance of the 2030 agenda and linking this to cities. He mentioned the importance of cities and mayors as territorial political actors. 65 of SDG goals will not be achieved without the direct action of local authorities. Local governments have a lot to do with goal number 5, gender equality. They can act directly to stop public violence against women in public transport and public spaces, which public transport, we must recall, is used greatly by women. And they also play an important role in combating gender-based violence and promoting economic development. So my question, because I do have a question for the panelists, is how can Latin America and Europe cooperate to achieve sustainable development that is based on gender equality? Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you so much. Who would like to answer that question? I'll start off. We come from the same region and representation. First, equal governance. This is fundamental, and it shouldn't even need recalling. As you all said, when we look at our daily problems, having equality is key. And I'm saying this not just reacting to your contribution, but because many people talk about Argentina, and most of the care, the burden of care, and I think care is the big demographic challenge we face, has to do with how can we achieve gender equality in terms of our social organization. Any space that has to do with kindergarten, anything having to do with supporting social fabric during a crisis is done by women. I'd say 80%. When you have a crisis is when you see this the most. In building resilience against crisis, in least favored social spheres, it's women who carry the burden. Also in the process of urbanizations, which are key when integrating our territories, we need resources, in fact, to redevelop our popular neighborhoods. This is a policy for which we have made progress in Argentina with a fund that was set up and a census. I think it'll be a national policy, and I hope that it won't be interrupted. But when it comes to planning neighborhoods, and when we call on the neighborhood associations and come together with the public administration, it's the level of participation and the participation of women who first decide on safe paths and which streets need redeveloping, which schools should be built. So there's no doubt that it's not just a problem of gender equality, it also has an impact on the quality of democracy. When we look at most of the population and social leadership, gender equality, and I'd even go as far as saying that, taking it beyond gender equality, the vision of democracy and women's contribution to democracy is much greater in our everyday lives of building a democracy from the perspective of care. Women are always at the center. I'm a mayor now, but I had a female mayor, Monica, who preceded me for 8 years. We have Carolina, who's also a mayoress, and I think that regardless to the affirmation of this panel, women play an essential role. Even if it doesn't come naturally yet. When we took over the mandate, we had to set up a government with equal representation of men and women. That was for our first mandate. Now we're preparing for our second mandate. And when you have to get the proposals from, they also say women have to say more. I'm afraid we won't be able to give each of the panelists the opportunity to answer every question. If you want to go back to this topic, I'm sure you will be able to do so during the coffee break. I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Álvaro Padrón, who would ask for the floor. You have the floor.
Buenos días a todas y a todos. Gracias.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. I am director of the Center for Training and Regional Integration, an organization created by the Rio and the European Union Group. Thank you to the organizers and Mercociudades, particularly with whom we have shared the work of regional integration for decades. So both in the opening and this panel focused on the international context, the global context. There is a well-known Uruguayan, Enrique Iglesias, saying that this is not a change in shift in time, but a time of shift. And this is what we are seeing in all the crises mentioned here. I would also like to add, especially giving a last name to inequality, the brutal concentration of richness and wealth in very few hands, concentrated in the world, and this is very much related to the questioning of our societies, to democracy, to politics, and to the capability of building public policies in a fair fashion. So we shouldn't be surprised by the frustration and the rage and everything generated by seeing a world that is wealthier than ever before, but with such a poor distribution. And it is very clear that being this and some others global problems, they only have a global solution. And here we have one of the great problems in politics and democracy. It is basically trapped in the state nation, and it's so hard for us to build international individuals who can fight those powers that achieve such success, especially economically speaking, and other complex issues such as organized crime. So we have no global responses. It will be very hard for us to solve these big-scale issues and somehow reverse this uncertainty that runs through our societies in the present. We also need to build this up democratically. That new world order and the new way of facing problems also needs to be democratic. And there's nothing less democratic than, once again, having a bipolar world. We need to face that bipolar nature of the world with multipolarity, and that is the main reason for an alliance between these two regions, the building of intermediate powers that allow us to avoid this bipolar nature. This unites us not just to defend ourselves, but also to have an influence and to try and bring different values to the discussion, values that join us and bring us together. And in this framework that provides the need for an international alliance, Latin America is a region under disputes because the historical influence of the US and a huge weight of China currently, and I'm going back to that bipolar nature, and Europe What about Europe? That's the question. Europe is late and not in the proper way. Despite what has been said here, the history, the cultural links, the productive commercial links and bonds, that's why it was so relevant to hold the recent summit for EU-CELAC. And as was just been said, to establish the agreement, European Union, Mercosur, but also to bring the political debate to the center. We cannot just relate based on interest and a commercial view. We need to overcome this in order to add an additional layer of perspective. And this criticism doing of Europe is also of that absent Europe. It's a self-criticism of the powerless and unimportant Latin America. We are less important than ever. And do you know what that is? That's the cost of non-integration. Our fragmentation is what has led to our position. We have less weight in this world, and in a new political moment for Latin America, centrality is to build region and to learn from our mistakes. And to build a region means less rhetorics and more specifics, more plurality, and not thinking about discussions that are just diluted and transform this into a popular cause. And I know that this seems like an abstraction, but if people don't believe in integration, the integration will not only not move forward, but it won't be sustained. And that experience has been seen in Latin America. And there is where we have the importance of local governments. There's no way of connecting societies with a project as ambitious as regional integration if it is not done through people making it a cause. And that is why we have local governments. This new stage coming from the Latin America and European Union summit cannot do without the accumulation, the experience, and the political power and the social power of local governments. And I believe it's very clear that this event shows this, especially because you have been capable of creating international subjects or individuals. You are your own networks in your regions, and altogether, in this sense, I believe it is necessary for the local power, and the representation of that citizenship in the territory is also present in an agenda. And it strikes me how it was not very present, and we need to change this process for the next summit in 2025. I hope this is all filled up with citizens in the next summit. Thank you so much. Thank you. I believe we have had a very significant input here, and we don't have much more time, but Xavier García Albiol had wanted to answer very shortly, please, because we're out of time, and then I would ask Mr. Eugene to close this panel. Thank you. Sorry, I hadn't requested it, but no. Then I'll introduce an element that I believe is interesting along the lines of what our colleague just mentioned. There is a reality. We have, as a foundation, a geopolitical, geoeconomic, and, well, up until 40 years ago, if we look for a meridian zero, if we look at political influence, decision influence, this was in the US. The entire financial and political world went through that area. And at present times, this zero meridian has shifted from the US to Asia, emerging countries such as China, India, or some other countries in Asia. I believe it is more necessary than ever, taking this reality into account, the need to have bodies and relationships, as pointed out, between the European Union, which I believe in general terms is doing things reasonably well, and Latin America. This type of gatherings and meetings are more necessary than ever. Events that allow us to face this new reality firmly that affects us all. Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, let's go to coffee break. Just a 30-second reflection. We're talking here about challenges, and it is very clear by this panel that there are similarities in those challenges, similarities between European Union and Latin America. We talk about answers, solutions, responses, what can be done, the great issues we can face and handle. And in those answers and solutions, we see that there's opportunities in Europe and Latin America that we need to face together. And some recommendations we're giving at the end, some lines for action that we could advance, and this is translated into an agenda. There is an agenda for this team on this side and on that side of the table. This agenda is an urgent agenda, the European Latin America agenda of local governments, of local action, regardless of what happens at that level of nation states, of our countries, our ministries, etc. There is an agenda here. I believe that we should not forget what we said at the beginning of the panel. It is too late to complain. It is too late to be pessimistic. And I believe we need to go to our coffee break on an optimistic note, because the door opened up a few months ago. Already we fell silent for time, but here we are sitting back on the table, and our responsibility, it is our responsibility to not be pessimistic, and we need to take this opportunity and take this future of the bi-regional relationship, take it forward. And this is how we conclude. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Zapata. We have a coffee break now, and we will resume the session at 11:20. Thank you so much.